Hello there, kia ora. Did you know that this government has sort of tied itself into a corner with a bit of a catch 22 when it comes to the media industry? You see, we all know that the industry is struggling a bit at the moment with the imminent closure of News Hub and the slashing of services from TVNZ. Broadcast media in particular is really publicly suffering, and they've asked the government for help on a couple of different fronts. But the government itself has to be really careful on this because not only do they have to avoid the kind of conspiracy theories that jumped up when they gave out the Public Interest Journalism Fund at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, or the Labour Party did that, well, there are other issues that come into play as well. Now, media itself has a really specific function in society, and while you might not necessarily like the bias that they present information with, their information has to be provable and fact checked, which means that the function that it has is really, really important. While you might get organizations like Reality Check Radio, for example, or Counterspin Media, who claim to be media, they don't have to go through those same legal checks when it comes to presenting information, which is what makes mainstream media so important. But what we've got here is a bit of a catch 22 for the government itself. For a start, if the government hands out money directly to a media organization, well, you're going to get claims like we saw under the Public Interest Journalism Fund, where a whole bunch of conspiracy theorists see it as a way of paying off the media to get uh, favorable coverage. Even though that particular purpose and process was really open to the public, was done through New Zealand On Air, who have a long history of how to go about funding organisations, and it funded things like kids' games learning about ocean life in the seas around the country and really in depth investigations into abuse and state care. Nothing at all to do with bribing people to be nice about the current government. But that's one of the risks that gets run here, especially when you have a party like New Zealand First, which has conspiracy theorists embedded into its current version's DNA. So they're not going to want to be seen to be doing anything like that because it will affect their base. But the National Party has another problem when it comes to their base, as does ACT. You see, the majority of people who still use linear broadcast television, well, the circle between them and people who go out and vote is a circle. It's not even an overlapping Venn diagram. You see, what we do know is that research done by New Zealand On Air last year showcased that people over the age of 60 tend to get their news and information still from broadcast television and radio. We also know from information released by the Electoral Commission that people who are over the age of 60 were infinitely more likely to go out and vote than people under the age of, say, 35. In fact, there's a bit of a dip there between 25 and 35 when it came to voting numbers. It's not ideal. But what we do know is that this older group is the one that's most heavily influenced by traditional broadcast media because they're the ones who use it the most. And they're the ones that go out and vote the most. And traditionally, the voter base for right leaning parties tends to be older, which means that if they don't save the media broadcast industry as it is now, they run the risk of actually losing their kind of audience, as it were, the people who would traditionally go out and vote for them anyway. And if they don't, well, there goes the media that feeds into that particular audience that they rely on. And at the same time, any media that's around is not going to be particularly receptive to the idea of painting this particular government in a good light, which means that the bias that you see on the media might change a little bit. And therefore, the influence it has on those voter bases that traditionally vote right is not going to be as strong as it was. And that's a real catch 22 situation. Now, there is probably a couple of different ways out of this, but Broadcasting Minister Melissa Lee has been told by the Prime Minister's office apparently not to go and do mainstream media interviews, therefore, pissing off the mainstream media. But she's okay apparently to talk to Sean Plunkett on the platform, who told her very specifically not to listen to the mainstream media industry because why would you? See what I mean about this being a complicated catch 22 situation? Essentially, the government is damned if they do and damned if they don't. And one of the reasons that they're being quiet at the moment is probably to try and find a third option that doesn't make them look bad in the eyes of some of their main constituents or in their competitors, while at the same time still allowing a free and fair media, which, to be honest, is not something they probably want either, considering just how much the media in the last couple of months has held them to account. What a fun position they've managed to get themselves into.